Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Frank Nooner. I live in Lafayette, Louisiana, and I have the privilege of serving on the Legal Service Corporation Board of Directors. In this capacity, I co-chair LSC's Housing Task Force, which I'll say more about in a few moments. Outside of my volunteer service with LSC, I also serve as a founder and managing partner of the law firm Nooner Pate here in Lafayette, which has given me a unique vantage point and opportunity to partner with local nonprofits such as United Way and Catholic Charities of Acadiana, which support individuals experiencing homelessness, risk of eviction, neighborhoods affected by disasters, families in need of emergency financial assistance. Today's conversation hits close to home because several years ago, I represented the owners of a mobile home park, which was being sold to an industrial facility which bordered two sides of that mobile home park. It was a very old and mobile home park in that the residents had been there for many years, and many of the homes could not be relocated due to their age and condition. The owner of the park initially gave 90 days notice and waived the rent for those 90 days to give the tenants an opportunity to save some money. Also, the owner made a six-figure donation to Catholic Charities of Acadiana so that it could provide assistance both financially and socially to these displaced homeowners. Eventually, it took about 6 months for the residents to vacate, and all the rents were waived during this period of time, and the residents were all placed through the good work of Catholic Charities. But this experience taught me that here, at least here in Louisiana, we do not have legal protections for manufactured homeowners other than a month-to-month rent. So this panel is very important, and we'll learn about what other states are doing to protect manufactured homeowners. I'm joined by a talented panel today, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to Meredith Brew, who is a staff attorney from the Yakima office at the Northwest Justice Project in Washington State. Meredith specializes in foreclosure defense and manufactured home park and tenant housing defense. Formerly, Meredith worked as an in-house counsel to two Washington Native American tribes and as a mediator and trainer in mediation skills. Our next panelist is Cecilia Guadarramo Trajo, and she is Associate Director for 9 to 5 Colorado, an affiliate of one of the largest, most respected national membership organizations of working women in the U.S. Cecilia is a lifelong advocate for hardworking Americans who live paycheck to paycheck, straining to support their families. Most recently, her work has focused on organizing in mobile home communities and advocating for more renters' rights at the local and state level. Our third panelist is Nick Smithberg, and he's the Executive Director of Iowa Legal Aid, a position he's held since January of 2018. Nick began his legal career as a housing unit staff attorney with South Brooklyn Legal Services. He transitioned from there into many years of private practice with the Cooley LLP law firm in New York, and later moved to the New York City Department of Affairs, where he served as Deputy General Counsel and Executive Director of Paid Sick Leave and Commuter Benefits Division, before returning to civil legal aid. During his tenure at Iowa Legal Aid, Nick has overseen the rapid expansion of Iowa Legal Aid's eviction practice during the COVID pandemic. Our next panelist is Esther Sullivan, and she's an associate professor of sociology at the University of Colorado, Denver, and author of Manufactured Insecurity: Mobile Home Parks and Americans' Tenuous Right to Place. Her research focuses on poverty, spatial inequality, legal regulation in housing, with special interest in both forced and voluntary mobility. Esther is currently conducting a National Science Foundation funded project of manufactured housing recovery following hurricanes Michael and Harvey in the Gulf Coast. As the COVID-19 pandemic continues to disrupt the lives and financial security of people across the country, LSC has launched a congressionally directed study to investigate the unmet legal needs surrounding eviction in the United States. As many in the audience will know, eviction is one, but not the only cause of housing instability. So LSC is using the opportunity created by our national eviction study to raise awareness about other drivers or consequences of housing insecurity, such as foreclosures, the reliance on long-term motel rentals, and the precarious laws regarding manufactured home ownership. Over the next year, our task force will develop educational resources like today's panel and future events, along with a series of briefing papers. LSC could not produce this material alone. We are benefiting from the lived experience and expertise of our panelists, and I want to thank Saseha, Esther, and Nick for lending their time to the Housing Task Force. We are also grateful for research and other support from a team of attorneys providing pro bono assistance led by Michael Biowitz and including David Schwartz and Jessica Allen. We hope that members of the legal aid community and private bar will find today's conversation and the suite of other housing and eviction resources useful as you continue to provide legal services and information to our most vulnerable neighbors facing eviction and other housing challenges. So let's begin the discussion. And Esther, we'll start with you. Esther, you have studied and written about manufactured housing for years. As we begin our discussion, could you give us an overview of manufactured housing, what it is, how it fits into the American housing ecosystem, and also help us by introducing the audience to some of the most important civil legal issues arising with manufactured housing?
Sure, and thank you all so much for having me here today. When we talk about manufactured housing, it's important to first kind of define our terms, because manufactured housing is defined according to the HUD code, which in 1976 established national design, performance, and installation standards for these prefabricated homes. And so really only homes built after the 1976 HUD code, which is the vast majority of manufactured housing that you're going to see out there, only that is really what should be called manufactured housing. And anything built before 1976, which is only about 20% of these homes, should be referred to as a mobile home. That distinction is really important because that outdated term, mobile home, really belies this central fact at the heart of manufactured housing, which is that it is not mobile. It is not intended or designed to be mobile. These homes are mobile one time, from the factory to the site of installation. That is part of what makes them so uniquely affordable, that they can be prefabricated in a factory and then moved to a site. That's why manufactured housing is less than half the cost to construct as traditional site-built housing. That's also why manufactured housing is such a crucial part of our affordable housing ecosystem, as you asked. Manufactured housing provides deeply, deeply affordable housing for both renters and owners, an estimated 18 million people across the US. But manufactured housing is especially important for low-income home ownership. So really, it is the primary route to the American dream for the lowest income American households. 70% of homes sold under $175,000 are manufactured homes. 50% of homes sold under $150,000 are manufactured homes, meaning the vast majority of these lower income home purchases, between 50 and 70%, are manufactured homes. This is a major a major vehicle for home ownership in this country. But under the law, manufactured housing is treated as personal, not real property, because at the time of manufacturing, the home isn't tied to land. So even when it's being purchased to be put on land, the default in most states is to treat these homes as personal property, and then states require extensive steps to retitle the home as real property. And this creates a cascade of negative impacts. So because of this personal property designation, between 70 and 79% of these homes are financed with a chattel loan or a personal property loan. And these loans have much higher financing costs, much weaker consumer protections. In the event of a default, chattel loans are not eligible for foreclosure protections, and these homes can be repossessed like a car. And so this is a major issue that impacts all manufactured homeowners, even those that are placing that home, on the land that they own. But I want to talk specifically about a host of other housing insecurities that impact the roughly 40% of manufactured housing households that place their homes in manufactured home communities, also commonly called mobile home parks or trailer parks. These communities concentrate a socially vulnerable population by nature of their deep affordability. Because, as I said, manufactured housing is already uniquely affordable. But when you purchase that home, or sometimes purchase that home secondhand, and then place it in a mobile home park where you can rent the land under the home, that makes this housing just uniquely affordable. And in fact, we see in mobile home parks and manufactured home communities that about an estimated 30% of residents in these communities are living in poverty. The nature of the land tenure, where residents are primarily owning the house, and 80% of residents in manufactured home communities are homeowners, but only 14% own the land under their home. Instead, in manufactured home communities across the country, the majority of households rent the land. That land tenure makes this some of the most insecure housing in the United States. It creates all these unique housing insecurities. In my research, I refer to these households as halfway homeowners because they have all the responsibilities of homeowners, but they don't own the land. They don't have property rights to the land under their home. Instead, they rent that land, and they do so oftentimes on month-to-month leases. Oftentimes, maybe they had a lease when they first started renting, but because this is permanent, affordable housing, because it's not mobile, it sits in place for years and decades, and oftentimes households have defaulted to a month-to-month lease. So in cases of missed payments or landlord disputes, they oftentimes have similar rights to apartment renters, and they can receive just 3 days notice to vacate after a missed payment, or 30 days notice of a termination of a lease in some states. But as I hope you're beginning to see, this is an entirely different housing situation than traditional renters. As I said, in parks, about 80% of households are homeowners. And yet these residents can be evicted over a single missed lot payment. Their rents can increase greatly year to year. And since moving one of these homes can cost up to $10,000, or, it can, as Frank said, can simply be impossible. A missed rent payment or the termination of a lease means that households lose everything in the process. They lose their home and they lose all their accrued housing equity. And now I would be remiss if I didn't include a note on the current pandemic and the eviction crisis here. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau found that households in manufactured homes face greater economic insecurity than those in other forms of housing during the pandemic. Manufactured home residents generally have lower incomes. And as I said, those living in manufactured home communities are particularly low income, even among all manufactured homeowners. And 30% of them are living in poverty. Owners and renters in manufactured homes are also more likely than residents of other housing types to work in the 5 industries that were most impacted by job losses during the crisis. And so as of December of last year, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau found that about a third of residents in manufactured homes reported being behind on their housing payments, compared to just 12% of single-family home residents and 18% of renters.
Let's shift for just a moment our focus to Nick and the civil legal aid provider perspective. And Nick, your program covers, as I understand it, the entire state of Iowa, 99 counties. And I know it's been reported that Iowa is experiencing some of the fastest growth in the country. What does manufactured housing look like in your state, and how is this growth impacting this segment of the housing market?
I guess the starting point would be to say that, Esther's articulated how this is a uniquely vulnerable group of renters who, own their property but can't move it. And against that backdrop, Iowa has, generally speaking, for renters, pretty minimal protections when it comes to manufactured housing. It's even less when, it would seem to me that arguably there should be more protections for those renters rather than less. But really, bottom line is in Iowa, you can do just about anything on 60 days notice when it comes to these situations. And so, with that vulnerability to begin with, one thing that we're seeing in Iowa, and I know that this has happened in a few other parts of the country, is a number of out-of-state private equity firms have come in and they're buying up properties around the state. One of them, a group called Haven Park, last year acquired a park in Dallas County, which is a suburban county adjacent to the county where Des Moines is located, in a town called Waukee. Now, Waukee is an affluent, rapidly growing suburb of Des Moines, and Dallas County, according to the most recent census, was the fourth fastest growing county in the United States. So, you have to think that there's an economic undercurrent here regarding the land. And to that point, we are seeing some sale termination clauses being inserted into leases, which stipulate that if the title to the property passes, the lease is automatically terminated. Now, we'll be litigating that. We don't think it's legal, but I think it shows a little bit of what's going on with the underlying economics. This is very big impact in Iowa, by the way. Another group called Impact, by the way, recently acquired a park in Dubuque, which has more than 400 units, which for that part of Iowa is an extremely large housing complex. And that group was actually one of the principals is a man named Frank Rolfe, who was famously quoted as saying, owning a manufactured housing park is like owning a Waffle House where the customers are chained to the table. So I think he's pretty candid about his understanding of how this works. We actually did win a fairly important fair housing case recently against that group based on where the landlord wouldn't take a Section 8 voucher from a disabled client. And so, we've been able to help some folks there. But bottom line, the situation in Iowa, it remains very precarious. And so we're going to keep working on it.
Thanks, Nick. Meredith, what are you seeing in the state of Washington as it relates to manufactured housing and civil legal issues?
Yes, thank you. We're seeing several distinct issues. First, I'd like to highlight that in Washington, most of the people who live in manufactured homes are the most vulnerable in our communities. So parks are filled with low-income people who generally lack resources to solve relatively small financial problems like a broken down car or a medical need. And their housing is placed at risk any number of times every year when such a problem arises in their lives. So this includes people with disabilities and seniors who are living on very small fixed incomes, some of which are as low as $738 a month. Hardworking families that are working many hours at minimum wage jobs, trying to make ends meet. People who do not speak English as a first language and are vulnerable to abuses as a result. And then some residents who may not have legal status in the country and who are often afraid to assert their rights. So because these homeowners are the most vulnerable, we see an increase in the incidence of discrimination based on race, ethnicity, and disability, and a significant number of improper demands and activities from park owners, including improper rent increases, improper rule changes, imposition of improper fees, and failures to properly provide utilities and maintain parks in a safe condition. It's also a very short and swift process that can result in the forced sale of homes very often in Washington. When someone falls behind on rent for the land that their home is located on in a park, the park owner can quickly give notice and file an eviction. And this can happen within a matter of weeks. When the homeowner cannot immediately pay that past due rent, a mobile home must either be moved, which is often impossible, as has already been described, or sold to someone else. So often, to avoid eviction in that instance, a tenant can voluntarily leave their home in the park, but their home still sits there. So in either case, either with or without an eviction action, a tenant is forced out of the home, but the home remains. So again, many of these homes are not mobile at all. And some of them actually are the older model mobile homes, not manufactured homes. We have a lot of those. They're so old that they can't be accepted in any other parks, even if you could move them, or it's completely impractical to move them. So moving isn't an option. So usually that means that the owner is forced to sell that home, most often at a steeply discounted rate, and very often to the park owner themselves. But in addition, in Washington, there's an unfortunate practice where a landlord can use a procedure involving a lien for unpaid rent and the filing an affidavit of abandonment where a tenant has left the home in order to avoid eviction. And then through the Department of Licensing can obtain a transfer of title to the property where a tenant has been forced to leave and there's still past rent due. That's a notice procedure, only requires no intervention of a court. It's very problematic. We're also seeing park closures, as others have mentioned. So Washington has seen several incidents of mobile home parks being noted for closure, especially in the more populated areas of our state where the housing and land market is booming and the land these parks sit on is worth much more if developed in a different manner. Washington law does currently require 1 year of notice for closure of a park. And although that may seem generous and is better than laws in other states, it's generally not sufficient time for homeowners to find a new park for their home. And for many, there's nowhere to move their home. So they actually have to pay for the destruction of their own home when these parks close. There was a bill proposed recently in the Washington legislature this past session to extend the notice period for park closure by 2 years, but that was not successful. Northwest Justice Project has been representing a group of predominantly Latino tenants in an old mobile home park that was purchased by a local government for purposes of closure. We filed an action under the Federal Fair Housing Act, raising claims of discrimination. And to date, in that case, the government park owner has removed over 25 homes from that park, simply destroying them on site. In that case, nearly all the homes that are owned by residents are so old they cannot be relocated or moved. And the tenants who remain in this park suffer regular utility issues with water shutoffs, maintenance problems, safety issues. But most importantly, the loss of their sense of safety, the loss of their sense of belonging in what was once a very vibrant and supportive community.
So the loss of community is one of the things that tenants lose when, or mobile home owners lose when they're evicted. Let's move to Cecilia for a moment. Your current role with 9 to 5 Colorado has a very personal connection. Before we hear about your professional work, Cecilia, please tell us about your experience growing up and living in a manufactured home.
Thank you, Frank. I'm the co-associate director for 9 to 5 Colorado. And yeah, I want to share a little bit about my experience living in a manufactured home. Unfortunately, my family lost our home in the foreclosure crisis, like hundreds and thousands of other families did in the US in 2009, 2008. And at that time, my mom kind of found herself now being a single mom and thought, this was the best way to own a home again. And some of her coworkers lived in a mobile home park. And I remember moving to this community, not ever knowing that these types of homes or communities existed. My younger brothers were like toddlers at the time and were very confused about like, where's the basement? And it looks like a house. And I know this is my new house. But really, my mom thought of things that I, as a teenager, would not think about. The home is located in a community of 400 other homes. It's close to public transportation. So, if her car didn't work or if something happened, we would still have access to public transit to get to work or to get to a grocery store. It's close to our schools. And so it's connected to a lot of the services we need. It is in between two highways, which is very common to see. I always tend to ask people, where is the closest mobile home park to you? Do you see it on your drive to work? Do you see it on your drive to drop off your kids at school, to your closest park? And most likely you'll find that you don't know or you don't remember. Oftentimes they're hidden because the infrastructure is dilapidated. And that's not due to the homeowners themselves, but to the lack of maintenance and upkeep from landlords to the park and to the community. For us, it's like a little village, really. I have known my neighbors for more than 9 years at this point. Who lives next to you. It is very different than living in an apartment where people sometimes are constantly, again, because of, increased rent and eviction, are transitioning out on a constant basis. And here we have a community. During COVID. It was where people were finding resources for food or for access to where to go get tested or to get a vaccine. Folks here have their own businesses and are workers themselves, and you can ask for resources or for someone who knows how to do something or fix something, and you will always find someone here. It is really common to find multi-generational families living in the same community, where you'll have maybe like grandparents or uncles or cousins who own homes in the same community. And it's really a network of support for folks. And I would just say the last thing is that, most families live in a community for a long time because they're not meant to be mobile. And so they really sit on that infrastructure.
Right. So Cecia, did I do better that time? I apologize. Could you share with us what 9 to 5 does through its Mobile Home Institute to empower and support mobile homeowners and community residents?
Yeah, definitely. So we launched a Mobile Home Park Institute, and really this place is to teach homeowners and residents the tools to organize. Organizing and community organizing has to be at the center of all the strategies and all the tools that we have. This means teaching residents how to organize 101. Part of it is going through Know Your Rights training, so residents understand their rights from the time they move into a community to the time of what displacement or closure of a park or eviction can mean for them and their families. But really, it's about teaching residents how to build power and how to organize among each other to really shift the conditions for them in their communities. At 9 to 5, we work through issue-based advocacy, mostly at the state level, sometimes at the local level. But we know that even when we change policy or we have a legal strategy, not that it doesn't matter, but it doesn't have the same impact if residents are not organized and that they don't have that trust. When we pass a policy, that's great, but enforcement comes after that. And that often falls on the back of residents and the back of organizations like mine that then have to do the work on the ground. If you're going to do a lawsuit, it takes a lot. I'm sure that many of you who have done class action lawsuits or have represented working class families and have represented immigrant families, there needs to be a level of trust and deep organizing and deep relationship building for folks to actually want to do this, because there's so many things at stake for them and their families. And so for us, that is kind of the central piece of all of our work. We obviously work through like a legal policy and organizing strategy, but it's always my advice that the organizing leads every strategy. We cannot make decisions for families, right? I would never want someone, even if it's the best attorney in the world, to tell me what is best for me and my family. I would want all the tools laid out on the table so that I can make those decisions, because residents know what is best for them and their families. They have those tools, they have that strategy, but they need attorneys and they need policymakers to be able to make those shifts and changes, to be able to have communities that can thrive, not just survive, not just live on a month-to-month basis, but actually be able to live in their homes comfortably.
Thank you. Nick, can you comment on the strength of community at mobile home parks in Iowa? And also, do you see proposed legislation improving the lives of Iowans?
Well, as has been said, I mean, I don't think I could say it more eloquently, but the strength of the community that we see in these parks is tremendous. It's really quite inspiring, actually. I mean, you have people who have lived together for a long time and know each other very well. And they are organized in many cases, well organized. And that wasn't something that we did. And that organization has made possible some real advocacy that's helped to shine a light on some of the situations that we've been dealing with in Iowa, which is, otherwise a tremendous imbalance of power. I mean, you have these private equity funds from out of state with essentially unlimited
Is it
resources.
on until 1:30. So
And the advocacy really has made a difference. The parks that have done better, I think it's where the tenants have really managed to make a lot of noise. There's been a lot of press, and Haven Park in particular became very camera shy, which is one of the private equity firms, and they've kind of backed off for a while. And there was actually one of the organizers at that park is now a member of our board of directors. So it's the kind of advocacy that we really support. In terms of the proposed legislation, I think anything could help. I think certainly there's some pending legislation at the federal level. There's also a couple of bills that have tried to get through at the state level in Iowa. And I will say this, one of the things that we've seen in Iowa is that the support for the manufactured housing bill is very much bipartisan. There are a number of, red counties, blue counties, they both have these constituents in there with manufactured housing. So we're hopeful that something will come through. I hate to say this, but almost anything would help compared to what we have now in terms of policy.
Sure. Thanks, Nick. Meredith, across the country, LSC grantees report that housing and unemployment cases have skyrocketed in the last 18 months. We know the pandemic has had an outsized impact on evictions and foreclosures. What are the implications for manufactured housing from the pandemic?
Well, there are homeowners who have lost income during the pandemic, and they may be behind on payments on their manufactured home loans. And for those who have homes on their own land, they face foreclosure. Most of the mortgages given for these homes are deemed high risk. They have very high interest rates, and they're securitized and sold to investors. The risk of loss of these homes is consequently higher, and the loans are not protected by the loan modification policies of Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, or HUD. This means that options to get that loan back on track are very limited, even if a homeowner has reestablished their income. So those loan modifications often require upfront cash payments to pay down the default and larger monthly payments going forward, not a more affordable mortgage payment. Those modifications, even if they're granted, often fail because they raise the costs for homeowners, not make them more affordable. States are less prepared than several years ago to assist with both foreclosure defense and with monetary assistance to homeowners. In Washington, for instance, although rental assistance has been rolled out for several months now, foreclosure assistance still has not. Then in addition, for those homes who are located in mobile home parks, not on their own land, the situation is likely much worse, and the time frame for loss of the home is likely much shorter. They may have fallen behind on their chattel loans, which, like a car, can end in repossession without a court order, or they may be behind on space rent, where in order to save their home, they have to move it to a new location or sell it, often at a discounted price and often to the owner of the park. So many people will consequently lose their investment in their home, which could range from several $1,000s of equity for older homes to tens of thousands of dollars of equity for newer homes. The pandemic has had a definite impact in Washington on the rental market. We are seeing a quick and significant rise in rents, in some cases a doubling of space rents for a multitude of reasons tied to the pandemic. We expect to see a larger number of homeowners, especially seniors and persons living with disabilities, priced out of their mobile home lots and forced into other housing on the private rental market or subsidized housing, if they can find it, into temporary living arrangements with family or friends, into RVs, moving from park to park, living in their cars, or into homelessness. And with the very limited affordable housing stock seen in Washington and around the country generally, we do expect there to see an increase in the rise in homelessness. Some of that may be temporary, but rates of homelessness have been rising throughout our state for the past several years. And now that the moratoria on foreclosure and eviction have been lifted in our state and nationally, we expect to see those increases rise. And I just add that there is, in the manufactured housing and mobile home industry, there is an incentive for park owners to act quickly, and a high payoff for them when they do. In most cases where someone defaults in rent, that leads to a forced sale of the home to the park owner. And that gives the park owner a means of adding homes to their portfolio. They can then charge both for rent of the home and for rent of the lot, increasing their monthly income. And that's why these parks are so valuable to investors. They bring in large amounts of revenue. So unless these are regulated, the most vulnerable homeowners that are living in these parks are at increased risk of exploitation.
Thanks, Meredith. Nick, a topic that's close to home here in Louisiana, considering we had Hurricane Ida a few weeks ago, are natural disasters. And I know natural disasters are not just in Louisiana, that Iowa has its own natural disasters. How are manufactured homes particularly vulnerable to disasters?
Well, Iowa, as you might know, experiences a fairly large number of tornadoes, and we also have periodic flooding, some of it quite serious. And so we know from experience that these units are very susceptible to wind damage and very susceptible to flooding and water damage. On top of all that, in the summer of 2020, we experienced something in Iowa called a derecho, which was not something that had ever occurred in my lifetime, which is an inland hurricane across the central part of the state, carrying winds in excess of 120 miles an hour, which ripped through the Cedar Rapids area, where there are a number of manufactured housing communities. And we are still doing a lot of work with those people to this day, digging out from that. And a number of units were damaged. One of the things that we see with disaster work in manufactured housing is, number one, very few people have insurance. And if they do, it's not very good insurance. And number two, these units are very hard to repair. And people don't necessarily want to repair them. Insurers would rather just declare it a total loss with, and a fair market value of one of these things is not really nearly enough for someone to get started somewhere else. But they're hard to repair. And so given that, and given the fact that the owner doesn't own the land, some charities are not allowed to finance repairs on that. Another thing that we experience in Iowa, and this certainly is particular to manufactured housing, is that FEMA relief often is not available because the FEMA triggers for relief assistance are tied to property values. And in many parts of Iowa, you can have some pretty devastating natural disaster that won't cross the line. And finally, this is a vulnerability on top of a vulnerability. But one of the things that we see in Iowa, both with traditional housing and with manufactured housing, is something called a contract sale, which is basically a rent to own setup where the person living in the park rents the land and they're buying, quote unquote, their house on an installment contract where if they miss a payment, they forfeit the entire thing. And when relief becomes available, they find themselves in a bind because they don't own the home to get it repaired or replaced. And the person who does own it doesn't live there. So nobody qualifies for assistance. And so you take a situation where it's pretty bad, and in many cases, you make it even worse.
Thanks, Nick. Cecia, what would you want the audience to know about being part of a manufactured home community And what should attorneys specifically take away from this today?
I think one thing to keep in mind, which a lot of folks have mentioned on the panel, is just the risk of displacement and kind of this rapid risk and egregious practices that happen in these communities. Right? I guess it's two different things. One, right now we have such a one in a lifetime opportunity as land is going up for sale in Colorado. 80 parks have gone up for sale since we passed opportunity to purchase in 2020. And unfortunately, only 2 of those 48 have been sold. 2 of those have been bought by the homeowners themselves. And so I really think that there's an opportunity for residents to become owners and have, community owned cooperative or being able to own the land and make those decisions. I also think that there's an opportunity here for more legal representation and legal strategies to stop egregious practices. Again, it doesn't matter if we have the best policies if we can't enforce them and we can't actually create tools to make sure that bad actors and egregious actors stop pretending like the law just doesn't apply to them. It's really hard to find attorneys who are experts on manufactured home law in Colorado. It's different than tenant law. And so oftentimes, you have to be mindful of, if you're going through an eviction, for example, the process to cure looks very different. A lot of the legal strategies might, be different. And so just encourage attorneys to really think about representing homeowners and also really working in partnership and in relationship with community organizations who already do work on the ground and understanding and respecting their expertise and their work. That's really important, right? Just because I don't have a law degree does not mean that the expertise and the work and the value that we bring to the table is not the same, and vice versa. That same respect for the tools and expertise that an attorney is putting in. I've learned so much about what it takes and how much it takes to go through a lawsuit, through a lot of our work. And so I think that there's an opportunity to really represent folks who need it the most. These are working class families. These are seniors. Sometimes these are veterans. These are people who really deserve, we all deserve to be housed. For us, housing is a human right, but it's an opportunity to really, really represent families who deserve legal counsel and deserve to have their home for them and their children.
Thank you. Esther, you opened up the discussion for us, and I would like for you to close it with some words of wisdom and advice for us. Are there other changes, model legal protections, or laws that you think are needed to help address the civil legal needs of manufactured homeowners?
Absolutely. The first place to look is these leases. We need to adjust the terms of these leases across states in the US. As I said, many default to these month-to-month leases, which are just a deeply insufficient protection for this unique homeowner land renter. We need longer leases. We need the right to renew leases year to year, longer grace periods for late rent payments, written notices of rent increases and utility increases, which residents often don't get, and the right to sell the home in place so that when someone wants to move out of the community, they can sell the home in place. Now, many of these changes are included in new legislation that was introduced this year by Iowa Representative Sidney Axie and Ro Khanna, California. But Axie and Khanna's Manufactured Housing Tenants Bill of Rights would impact owners in manufactured housing communities that receive federal financing through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and the FHA. That is a tiny fraction of residents in manufactured housing communities, the vast majority of whom are privately owned businesses owned by corporation or mom and pops that don't receive any federal funding. So their states need to do more. Just as Cecia said, we need to support organizing that's already going on in states. And we also need education to inform residents of the rights that they already have. We need control over rent hikes as they have in states like Oregon. We need dispute resolution systems before things get to the court, like the one that we instituted in Colorado. And ultimately, just as Cecia is saying, the gold standard is to stabilize that land under these residents' homes through cooperative ownership, either nonprofit ownership through a land trust or collective ownership by residents themselves. And so Axne and Kana have a second bill, the Manufactured Housing Preservation Act, that would provide grants of up to $2 million to help states and local government agencies to help resident cooperatives purchase their local mobile home parks. Other work is being done on the part of nonprofits like Rock USA, but states, locality, the federal government, we all need to do more here.
Thank you, Esther. Please join me in giving our panelists a virtual clap. Thank you.